Attention, please. Good evening. It's nice to see so many people in the audience in our brand new facility. It's April 6th, 2015. It's a meeting of the Operating School Committee. We previously opened the meeting at 6:30 for an executive session. We are now back in public session. The only item on our agenda tonight is our annual public hearing on the school committee's FY 2016 budget. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation by the administration on the budget. It's a bullet point presentation. I think it's going to last about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. After we conclude the presentation, we're going to open it up for comments from the school committee or questions from the school committee members, and then we'll open it up to the audience. The only thing I ask is that when you have questions, please go through the chair, raise your hand, you'll be recognized, you go through the chair, and we'll direct the question to the appropriate person to answer it. Please don't interrupt the presentation. I'm going to ask you to let the presentation go uninterrupted, and then you can ask all the questions you want afterwards, okay? So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to John Bernard, the superintendent of schools. John? Oh, microphones. Those microphones are working, so if you're talking about us, try to stay away from the microphone, because we might be able to hear it.
I think they pick up any sound. There's no button or anything.
Yeah, they're kind of sensitive.
They're flashing red.
No, there is a button. Yeah.
Is there? But they flat. But it looks like when people are talking, they're just turning on.
Well, let's see. We'll see how they work in the timers. Okay. At this time, Mr. Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd first like to begin by thanking a number of individuals and groups who have contributed a great deal of time, energy, and thought into the development of the fiscal year 2016 preliminary modified level services budget for the North Reading Public Schools. The proposed budget is the result of an extraordinary amount of thoughtful consideration and collaboration on the part of a good number of groups and individuals, and I believe strikes a healthy balance between advocating for the needs of the North Reading Public Schools to continue its mission of providing a high-quality educational program for all students while respecting the community's ability to financially support the requests presented. I'm grateful for the work of the administrators of the school district who make up the administrative council. And this includes the 5 school principals, the Director of People Personnel Services, the Director of Finance and Operations, and the Assistant Superintendent. Each member has done a commendable job of working collaboratively to craft a preliminary budget for fiscal year 2016 that supports us as a district. I thank them for being present here this evening as well. I'm equally grateful to the advocacy groups within the town, including the various school councils, parents associations, and the North Reading United for Education, and the faculty and staff of our district for their contributions both in the budget development process and for their overall advocacy of our school's district mission and vision. I'm also very thankful to the finance planning team, whose members are Selectman Bob Messeri and Mike Crisco, Town Administrator Michael Gilberto, Finance Director Liz Paveo, School Committee members Jerry Venezia and Cliff Bowers, and Finance Committee members Abby Herbert and Dan Pulver. These individuals work regularly with me and our Director of Finance and Operations, Michael Connolly, to collaborate on the financial aspects of our community. The members remain deeply committed to our town and to our school district. Their efforts in support of public education are very much appreciated. I wish to extend my appreciation to the school committee for their high level of engagement in all aspects of their work in support of the North Reading Public Schools, and most especially for their work with the development of the fiscal year 2016 budget. Each of you is clearly committed to providing the personnel, instructional resources, and climate that is needed to do our best work for all of our students. And lastly, I wish to extend my deepest appreciation to our Director of Finance and Operations, Mr. Michael Connolly, for his patience, competence, and commitment as he worked very closely with me, perhaps more closely and more often than he might have hoped, shepherding me through the development of my first fiscal budget as the new superintendent of schools. Thank you very much, Michael. And now to our fiscal year 2016 budget. The preliminary modified level services budget for fiscal year 2016 represents a $1,122,211 or 4.2% increase over the fiscal year 2015 budget appropriation. As a result of the finance planning team meeting held on March 27th and the budget workshop with the school committee on March 31st, the gap in the fiscal year 2016 budget for the North Reading Public Schools has been reduced from $760,228 to $407,564. A list of reductions has been identified to help close this budget gap and achieve a balanced budget. A breakdown of the available revenue and list of reductions will be presented in detail as part of this evening's presentation. Finally, the preliminary modified level services budget for fiscal year 2016 seeks to advance our school district by meeting the strategic objectives identified in NRPS 2016, A Strategy for the Future, which has served as the strategic plan and guiding document for the North Reading Public Schools since its inception nearly 5 years ago. Focused on 3 key objectives: teaching and learning, student services, and technology integration, NRPS 2016 has served as a solid blueprint for enhancing our work to the benefit of all students. In addition, the strategic plan provides details around those areas where the fiscal year 2016 budget will assist the school district in further meeting its objectives, and these details will also be discussed as part of this evening's presentation. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Pond.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. So this evening I thought I would start the presentation by just taking a quick look at the main key topics we plan to cover this evening before we open it up to questions. We do want to briefly review the key FY16 budget drivers behind our proposal. We want to take a little bit in more detail at the numbers that are behind the preliminary budget proposal as well. We want to discuss the current budget gap that Mr. Bernard just spoke to. We want to discuss our plan to close that budget gap and balance the fiscal 2016 budget. We then plan to discuss the next steps in the budget process, and then we will open it up to questions from the school committee and the members of the public. So before I get into the budget numbers, I do want to just briefly look at this pie chart. We have certainly, something looked at this in the past, and take a look at what are the major, from a big picture perspective, the funding sources of the school budget, and get a sense of some of the challenges that we are certainly faced with. The largest revenue source is from local property taxes. These make up about 71% of the revenue, of the town school's revenue. State aid, that's state aid from certainly the state, that's our Chapter 70 educational funding, and the governor's local aid makes up 13.7%. Local receipts, these are the fees and grants, make up the remaining revenue sources. These revenue sources have remained relatively flat for the last several years. So when you have property taxes, which are obviously capped at 2.5%, and when you have a situation where our fixed costs have been growing between 6 and 7% annually, it certainly presents a structural problem and challenge in both funding school and town budgets. These are our key budget drivers. Every school budget is certainly driven by our contractual salary obligations. Salaries represent over 83% of our total budget requests. They are certainly a key and always a key driver of the school budget. These are our fixed costs of contractual adjustments, including cost of living raises, step increases for both our professional and support staff. We are currently in contract negotiations with the Teachers Association, so that is certainly included in our contractual salary obligations, and certainly a big driver of our FY16 budget proposal. As Mr. Bernard spoke to earlier, NRPS 2016 Year 5 represents the district's educational strategic plan. FY16 would represent the final year of that strategic budget vision, and it's certainly always been a key driver over the last several fiscal years. There were some much-needed increases included in the budget requests, and certainly focuses on student services and technology integration strategy areas, and we're certainly going to get into a little bit more about what is behind this request in great detail later in the presentation. Enrollment is always a big driver of the school budget. In this particular FY16 budget proposal, we have a need to address the increase of the high school enrollment, which is expected to rise steadily over the next 3 fiscal years, reaching a peak in about fiscal year 2018. This increase has had a significant impact on class sizes and course offerings currently at the high school. As a result, the FY16 budget proposal includes several key FTE increases at the high school to protect course offerings and class sizes. Special education costs, again, always a key budget driver. This represents the most volatility of the FY16 budget proposal, and certainly that's consistent across the state. I'm happy to report that at this point, as we look at our special education costs, we are anticipating that there will be a decline in these costs as we look at to next fiscal year. We currently are seeing some students graduating programs are returning to district or moving out of North Reading, so that we are projecting at the moment a savings when we look at out-of-district placements in transportation obligations and special education. These programs certainly help. The program, we worked very hard to evaluate the special education programs where appropriate and have allocated current resources to provide additional student support services, in particular to increase social and emotional support. These programs help assist with reducing the potential need for outside placements. In looking at this pie chart, this is the major numbers behind the preliminary FY16 budget proposal. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, our salaries represent 83.8% of our budget proposal. That is a pretty consistent, we typically in school budgets, and over the last several years, you'll see that our salaries do represent over 80% of our school budget. The next largest piece of the pie would be our operations and maintenance. This makes up 5.8%. It's slightly up from last year, which is partly driven by some of the new operational costs to upgrade the new building. Costs of out-of-district tuitions make up the next largest percent at 5.4%, which is actually slightly down from a year ago. It was 6.1% in fiscal year 2015. Our instructional expenses, these are the expenses mainly of our budget leaders, principals, and directors, some of the discretionary expenses for instructional materials. This represents only 4.1% of the budget, and I do want to mention that our instructional expense budgets have been level funded in this proposal, and that has been the case over the last several fiscal years. But overall, this breakdown is very consistent with prior year budgets. As Mr. Bernard mentioned earlier this evening, the total budget request is $27,886,226, which is a 4.2% increase. Looking at our enrollment projections, as you can see, the current or historical enrollment is highlighted in blue in the chart, and our projected enrollments going forward over the next 5 years are highlighted in the darker green color. District-wide enrollment is projected to decline slightly over the next 5 years. Over the next 3 years, K through 5 enrollments are forecasted to remain relatively stable. Grades 6 through 8 are expected to decrease potentially up to 80 students over the next 3 years. However, I will note that it is likely that these patterns that we have projected may not last for as long as 3 to 5 years, as the economy and real estate market do seem to improve, and it's very possible that in-migration will return to North Reading. We have already seen evidence of this, certainly this year, over the last couple of years, with an increase in homes being sold and new homes being built. So enrollment projections you always have to look at each and every year. It's important to revisit these. But at this point, we're seeing the elementary level kind of stabilizing over the next 3 to 5 years, the middle school enrollments declining as the higher class sizes move on to the high school. And the need from an enrollment perspective is certainly at the high school level, as we are anticipating an increase of 32 students at the high school level all within the next 3 years. We do think the opening of the new building is seen as a contributing factor to a higher percentage of 8th grade students moving into 9th grade. Next year, it is anticipated the high school will have an additional 18 to 25 students, so as a result, it is a priority for the FY16 budget proposal to dedicate staffing increases to the high school to certainly preserve educational sound class sizes. In getting into the detail of enrollment-driven changes reflected in the budget proposal, as a result of some of the enrollment changes going down at the middle school and the elementary level, we have adjusted the budget to reflect a decline in 2.0 FTE middle school teachers and a 1.0 teacher at the elementary school level. We do think these reductions can be made without significantly impacting class sizes. The district held its full-day kindergarten registration in February, and the kindergarten numbers certainly warrant an additional full-day kindergarten section being offered, which would come with an additional teacher and paraprofessional. This would ensure that all parents seeking and students seeking a full-day kindergarten spot would be offered a spot next fiscal year. The FY16 preliminary budget proposal does reflect this cost. As you can see, the numbers may not reflect the full cost depicted on the chart of a full teacher and paraprofessional, and that is because there's an additional revenue offset built into that cost as a result of the increased enrollment. We anticipate receiving additional tuition revenue as well. So when we look at the high school enrollment-driven changes, as I mentioned, because of the increase in student population at the high school, it certainly is a priority to dedicate staffing at the high school level. So as you can see, this chart certainly calls for an increase of 3.0 FTE on instructional staff to protect class size and course offerings at the high school level. It's also restoring some current positions that were kind of reorganized and reclassified elsewhere at this fiscal year to address the class sizes this current year. And that is the 0.4 physical education position as well as 0.6 business computer position. So overall, it's a 3.0 FTE instructional increase. It also calls for a 1.0 guidance counselor. The current guidance counselor, the recommended American School Counselors recommend counselor-student ratios is 1 to 250. The average caseload of our high school guidance counselors currently is 287. So with the additional students at the high school next year, the additional guidance counselor is critical to bring the high school student to counselor ratio within recommended levels. In total, the FTE increase of the enrollment changes at the district is 3.0, and this is only an increase to the budget of $80,456. So it's relatively modest amount of all the changes that we anticipate with all the enrollment changes across the district. I did want to spend a minute and look at the high school class size situation in a little more detail. This is a chart that depicts the current present-day class size situation at the high school. The number of classes are depicted on the vertical axis, and the number of students in each class is depicted along the horizontal axis. So as we can see by looking at this chart, there's currently, and today, 77 classes in the core academic subjects have class sizes of 24 or greater. This represents over 56% of classes in core academic subject areas that have class sizes sort of above what we would expect for optimum levels for teaching and learning. 41 classes have 27 or more students, which represents 30% of our core academic classes. So as you can see, by the prior slide I just showed, certainly a need to have the enrollment increases at the high school level to protect course offerings and address the class size situation at the high school. As we look in more detail at our NRPS 2016 position, that is the strategic plan for continuous improvement Mr. Bernard spoke to earlier, this is kind of the itemized list that would accomplish some key technology integration and student service strategy areas represented in NRPS 2016. Again, the total increase is $279,848, which represents about a 1% increase in our 2016 budget proposal. The first initiative is adding 2.0 digital learning specialists. Currently, the district has 1.4 digital learning specialists. This was due to a 0.6 FTE reassignment to the high school this year to address the enrollment. The need really is for one digital learning specialist in each school. Digital learning is better supported by additional positions, and these positions will not only teach in the classroom, but they will guide teachers' self-directed professional development, how to effectively integrate technology into the classroom to accomplish that key technology integration strategy. The next request is a 1.0 library media specialist at the middle school. Next year, in the new building, there will be over 1,400 students in the combined high school, middle school. One librarian media specialist is not enough to service all of these students and their teachers. Increasing our librarian specialists will allow more students and teachers to access the media center and all of its resources. The next request is the student service strategy area. It's a 1.0 special education teacher at the high school. Currently, the class sizes in the code talk classes at the high school have increased, and due to the expected increase in enrollment next year at the high school, there's a need to add an additional special education teacher to control the code talk class sizes in this area. Reduced class sizes will allow for more personalized instruction and thus enhanced learning. This is especially critical for addressing the learning accommodations of these high-need students. The next increase is a 0.5 reading teacher at the middle school level. Increasing the middle school's reading teachers will allow them to service more students to provide the necessary support. Currently, our reading teachers primarily support special education students. By increasing the part-time position to full-time, the teachers will be able to support regular education students who are in need of this additional support. There has been an increasing number of students in our district's language and behavioral programs, so our next request is a 0.8 FTE speech and language therapist district-wide. The current caseload of the speech and language pathologist staff are well above optimum levels at the secondary level, which has led to a need to hire outside contractors for additional support. The district must continue to support the in-district programs for students, and particularly on the autism spectrum, by enhancing services to provide challenging academic opportunities for these students. This 0.8 FTE increase will allow the district to meet this need. So again, the total is 5.3 FTE increase in our NPS 2016 initiatives, which represents about 1% of our budget proposal, which is $279,848. So getting back to sort of the big picture, our overall budget, the school department's preliminary budget request is for $27,886,226. This, I will just note, is slightly higher than the preliminary proposal that may be included in the budget goals from the budget that was posted online. That was because over the last few weeks we did find a need to increase the high school, middle school's utility budget by about $65,000. We had hoped that we would capture some savings in the preliminary proposal, but we feel that adjustment is needed at this point as we now have a full winter's worth of usage analysis, etc. I will note, however, that we are very optimistic that once we occupy this beautiful new high school, middle school next year, and we have sort of a year's work under our belt, that we do feel like we will eventually receive some utility savings and some operational savings in this new building. But we feel next year, there's some volatility, we feel that's a necessary adjustment. I do want to note that, as usual, we do rely on several revenue offsets. So as you can see, both between salaries and expenses, these are from our federal and state grants that we rely on. Many of these are entitlement grants that we receive from the state, as well as some of the fees and tuitions that we do charge in revolving accounts. So our preliminary general fund budget request does rely on about $2.3 million of revenue offsets from our federal, state grants, and revolving accounts. We certainly work hard to optimize that level of revenue offsets as much as we can. And this chart does depict that. So here's where we are today in terms of the budget gap. A preliminary sort of adjusted budget proposal at the $27,886,226. The current FY16 available funds in the most recent town revenue plan would allow for a $27,478,662 budget. So as Mr. Brown spoke to earlier, the current budget gap is $407,564. I will echo Mr. Bernard's comments that we're certainly greatly appreciative of the work of the finance planning team, several members of the finance committee, and the school committee that have worked hard over the last several weeks to lessen this budget gap and reduce it considerably from what it was at $1,760,000. So our plan to balance the budget, certainly these are conversations that the administrative team, along with the school committee, we held our annual budget workshop last Tuesday evening on March 31st. We went through several iterations of how we would plan to balance the school department's budget and account for the $407,564 budget gap. Certainly never easy conversations, but we feel these were sort of least harmful impact decisions we could make at this time that would bring the budget within balance. Our proposal did include a 0.7 FTE central office receptionist position. This is a new position that we do not have currently in the budget. We will be moving into a new central office suite next year with all the major central office departments, certainly sharing an office suite. And we had hoped that we would capture sort of a part-time central office receptionist. We now will look to kind of accomplish that in other ways. So the first step would be to reduce the amount we were carrying in our general fund for this position. The next position on the list is a 1.0 custodial position. You may recall that this year we did add a 1.0 custodian to about midway through the school year, back in October, to address the square footage in this building. This would reduce that and return back to prior levels, custodian levels, number of custodians that we have had in the district. We look at our paraprofessional needs, and certainly from our inclusion paraprofessional needs every year with the administrative team, and we certainly look at how we can meet the needs of students. When we had done that, we identified some new inclusion paraprofessional needs that would be necessary. And so this is not a reduction to our current staff, but it would be a reduction of a proposed new position that we had in the preliminary proposal. We would certainly try to meet this need within the existing staff that we have. We had talked about restoring, and part of the enrollment increases, restoring a 0.4 from the physical education. That was sort of part of a reassignment of the existing staff member to teach more sections at the high school. This reduction would only restore 0.2 of our preliminary proposal's 0.4 restoration that I had shown on an earlier slide. Part of our preliminary proposal did include a plan to restructure the curriculum leadership model across the district. So currently there are 25 leadership opportunities for curriculum leaders across the district. We have certainly seen a need to try to enhance the level of services, both from adding curriculum leadership opportunities, as well as to increase the need for additional supervision and evaluation support. Part is something that's always been on the administrator's mind, the district's mind for several years. Part of what's kind of heightened this need is the state mandated new educator evaluation model has certainly made it, the need for that additional supervision and evaluation much more apparent. So we were hoping to capture a plan to restructure our curriculum leadership model and do that over a period of 3 years. So that next year we would have represented phase 1 of this plan. So that would delay this model another year. We had hoped to restore our small capital and equipment line items. I noted earlier that our expense budgets, discretionary spending by principals and budget leaders were level funded. We had hoped, and there was a budget goal early on in the process to kind of restore those line items. You may recall in fiscal 2015, most of our expense budget line items took about a 5 to 10% reduction, and our small capital equipment line items, which helped restore some of the smaller, mainly maintenance and operational items across the district, that the large capital proposal with the town and school, the consolidated plan with the town was not qualified for. We hope to kind of restore and keep some of those projects moving. So this proposal would eliminate the restoration of those line items. We had hoped to fund or partially fund, along with the town, a shared facilities position. The school would have picked up about $12,000 of a shared position to benefit both the town and the school. This proposal would back off on the school's portion of hoping to accomplish some of a new shared facilities position. We continue to review the preliminary proposal. There continues to be uncertainty. So at this point, we are carrying about $205,529 in what we're calling unidentified reductions. The school committee is obviously not planning on voting the budget until April 27th. It would not move to town meeting until June 1st, so there's certainly some time left in the budget process. So the hope is that additional reductions would be identified as we move throughout this process. If that were not able to be realized, we actually have a contingency plan, which is represented on this slide. And here is a list of places we think we would certainly need to go to if necessary, to balance the budget. Now, as you can see, this obviously represents a list in amount much higher than the remaining $205,000 of what we're calling unidentified reductions. But as you can see, at this point, we would need to turn to some of the key initiatives that we would put into the proposal. We have to certainly consider all of these options. Certainly be on the table as well. But this, we would have to come up with an additional $205,529. In terms of our next steps, before I turn it over for discussion, we continue to have ongoing discussion with the finance planning team about available revenues. And due to what Mr. Bernard did earlier this evening, I want to take this opportunity to publicly thank the efforts of the finance planning team, in particular Bob Siri, Michael Crisco, Town Finance Director Elizabeth Laveo, Town Administrator Michael Roberto, as well as Abby Herbert and Dan Pulver with the Finance Committee, for the continued efforts and support of the school district over the last several weeks to minimize the budget impact of the school department reductions. It has been a great experience for me working with members of the finance planning team. Again, I'm only a year and a half into my experience here in North Reading, and I continue to think this is a great model that leads to a very collaborative effort on both the school and town officials. Moving on, we are due to present our budget to the Finance Committee on April 15th. The school committee vote is scheduled for April 27th. The town meeting vote is scheduled for June 1st. We continue to need to await state budget action, so the governor has released his proposal. It's moving its way through the House and Senate currently, so we'll certainly have to await any final actions, certainly by the state. And we will continue to discuss the proposal over the next several weeks, and that's why we're here this evening as well. So without further, I'll turn it over to
Thank you, Michael.
Chairman.
Excellent job. Mr. Bernard, do you have anything further to say before we open it up?
I do not, sir.
Okay. This time I'm going to open it up for discussion, questions or comments from the members of the school committee. Anybody? Anything further?
I just want to thank all the parents, teachers, administrators for being here tonight. One, for taking an interest in our school system, and two, it really makes me happy that we can use this space for community meetings, because it's a great space, and I'm glad they're here. The thing I wanted to touch on was the high school. This has been an issue for probably running on 3 years now, with and you saw the class sizes that Michael put up on the screen. We actually need more staff to address the enrollment size at the high school right now, but I think that what we're proposing tonight makes a good dent in that, and I think it's critical that we don't touch any of the high school staff that we're adding this year. I think we need to address those sizes. The one issue that you have is you have a lot of, you saw some small class sizes up there, and I can ask the superintendent or the principal to address this, but my guess is some of those small class sizes are electives that might be lifelines for some kids who really want to take a course that's an elective, because it gets them out of the day-to-day drudgery and the rut of taking the core courses. So my guess is that some of those electives are smaller classes, and if that's the case, you're kind of balancing that, keeping the student interested with having maybe 2 or 3 more students in a core class than you want to have. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I'm just guessing that that's the case. And that's kind of the fine line we walk there with those class sizes.
I don't think you're wrong. I think it could be a combination of things. It could be a specialized program for students with special needs. It's likely an elective course. It could also be an advanced placement course, which is a very specialized course, might only run one section. So it could be any one of those.
That's it.
Janine, anything before we? Cliff? Catalyst, that's good. I just want to take the opportunity to welcome the Administrative Council, thank them for being here tonight, and also the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. It's already been mentioned a couple of times. We have a somewhat unique relationship here in North Reading, the School Committee, the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen. We work together very collaboratively. We meet once a month as a finance planning team. And every single year, as a result of that collaboration, we're able to get to a point where we go to town meeting with a balanced budget. So again, I'd like to thank the members. I see a lot of smiling faces out here, and then I see the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. But again, thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. At this time, we're going to open it up for questions or comments from the audience. Again, I'd ask you to just go through the chair. We'll direct it to the person that's best capable of answering that question. No questions? All right, thank you very much for coming. We have kind of a 9:18 deadline when the game starts tonight. But go ahead. Anybody that, just raise your hand, you'll be recognized. Mr. Prisco.
Just to make sure I understand a little clarification on some of the slides. Speak to the mic. Had the great opportunity to be part of the finance.
Mike, you're the only one in the whole room sitting where there's no microphone.
I'll speak louder.
All right, speak up so they can hear you.
Okay. I did have the opportunity to be part of the financial planning team meeting, which was great. So I just want to make sure the numbers that were presented, when we went through our discussion with the financial planning team meeting, we made sure that any of the new FTEs that are included in the budget, that we account for the fixed cost. And where are they? Are they in this presentation, or are they excluded from the presentation from the numbers side?
Sure. They are included, I think, as part of, and Liz can correct me if I'm wrong, but as part of the way the revenue plan works from the town side, the finance planning kind of team looks at each month, is that part of the fixed costs, which kind of come off the top. Then the schools represent about, pretty close to a 2/3 split, after the fixed costs have come off. So I believe with the adjusted revenue plan on the work that we did that afternoon, the additional fixed costs as a result of the net increases of FTE to the school department budget were included, as well as some other adjustments. So I do think it's reflected in, essentially, I think it's reflected in the 27,478, 662 number, guideline number.
All right, just want to make sure. You good with that?
Bob?
I just, one of your slides where you added up FTEs and came out with 3.0,
Yep.
and I counted 4, and I think,
This one right there.
So I think what's you're missing is this is a continuation from the prior slide. So there's a -1 reduction on this slide.
okay, got it.
It carries on. It's 2 slides. It was too much to put on 1 slide. Good question.
Marcy?
Thank you. Marcy Bailey, 21 Wayne Drive. I guess I have some comments and some questions. First, I'd like to very much thank, as a former member of the finance planning team, I know the hard work that goes into that, so I'd like to thank the finance planning team, the school committee, the board of selectmen, the finance committee, and the academic leadership of the school department for working so hard to do the best they can for our town and our students. That said, I have a question, and then I'd like to make some comments. Will the 1.0 STEM teacher that's included in the budget, and I see not on the list of potential reductions, will that allow the 4 courses at the high school that have been noted as every other year courses now to return to annual courses if there is adequate student demand for those courses? And that would be biochemistry, genetics, bioethics and fauna, and principles of engineering.
I would offer a qualified yes. There are other factors to consider. You mentioned one about student interest, but it certainly helps the cause. And that was the reason for the position being included in the budget, which was the intent to be able to offer the courses that we have traditionally offered.
So if there is student numbers to run a section of those courses, they would run.
Yeah, there are other things to consider, but
Such as?
Teacher licensure, making sure that we have the right licenses for people to teach. We don't know right now all of the course selections that students will make. So we don't know maybe that is there going to be some anomaly with the life science interest that we didn't have in a prior year. But I think it's very, I would say it was very, very likely that the additional STEM teacher that we hired was going to accommodate the course offerings that we have.
I do think that's critical, especially for juniors who are maybe in their senior year expecting to take genetics next year because it's a particular area of interest, and then they're closed out, so I'm glad to see that position there.
I don't think you'd find disagreement, and that was the thrust behind the position being included in the budget, just to make sure that we were able to offer the courses that we traditionally been able to offer.
That said, I do have a couple of areas of concern. I do think that the positions in the high school, guidance, the STEM, and the other teaching positions are critically necessary. Cutting the PE at a time when you're mandating a requirement for PE in junior and senior year, and I know there are other ways to take it, but should there be students who cannot fulfill their new PE requirement outside of the academic classroom, I would hate to see those classes.
It's not a reduction of the...
It's just an adjustment, Marcy, really.
Well, it's a reduction of a new position, no?
No.
No.
Currently, there's a teacher at the high school, the athletic
Right.
director, that's teaching 4 classes. The hope is to reduce that back to 2.
So he would stay.
If we're not able to do that, so the idea was that .4 restoration was to, it doesn't change the net offerings, it's an additional staff person though, because
So he would continue?
to teach, yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then last year, I know that there was a humanities teacher added for this current academic year. I see that there's not another request for that. And as a member of the high school council, I've been able to see some of the enrollments in the ELA courses. And I know, for example, my daughter in social studies has 29 students in her 10th grade honor social studies class, and her teacher at teacher conferences said to me, there's almost only so much writing I can do. It's the last block of the day. I've got 29 kids in here. It's hard to corral and make progress. So even though there was a humanities teacher added last year, and it's not on this budget, it's still a need. There are 31 and 30 students in dramatic literature classes, and I just took some notes here that one of the requirements of the dramatic literature course is for students to develop their own original dramatic material and their own critical views. I think for writing with 30 and 31 students in a class, it's very hard for a teacher to give the individual feedback needed to improve writing and to do anything more than mark where that writing lies on the rubric. No fault or disrespect to the teacher when you have 30 or 31 students in the class. AP English Language, there's a section with 30 students and a section with 26 students. Again, essentially a college level course with a great deal of writing. So I think that humanities between the class sizes in ELA and in social studies is a need. I think I saw the new .4 foreign language teacher on the potential list of reductions. Again, my daughter has 30 students in the foreign language class, and we have these beautiful large new classrooms, and she said her desk is actually overlapping onto the teacher's desk because there are so many students in the classroom. So I would hope that position would be looked at very carefully before being part of this $205,000. And finally, I know that the district has been trying to make a lot of progress in technology and integrating technology, into everyday curriculum. I guess I'm an optimist. I thought by the time my daughter was a junior when she said, when do you think I'll have an iPad? And when do you think I'll stop carrying a 35-pound backpack? And I said, about when she was in 7th or 8th grade. I said, I think when you're a junior. I think the school system will get there when you're a junior.
That was based on her staying back at least 1 year.
I didn't tell her that. I wanted to strive for the best. But I think for the district to move forward and to just give our students a leg up with technology and teach our students the way they're used to learning, the way they become accustomed to that. I know you're going to have to pick and choose, but I don't think that's a luxury. I think it's a requirement now, and I know for the increased enrollment at my high school, next year, some courses, you'll be buying additional copies of 10 to 15-year-old textbooks to meet the enrollment. And boy, does that hurt when it's just, it's a Band-Aid because we can't move forward instead of, perhaps employing a digital textbook for students across the grade level, and we're patching with 10 to 15-year-old textbooks. And so I would say, I know you're between a rock and a hard place. I know we can't print money, but the things on this list are not luxuries, they're all.
We're in complete agreement with you, and we've gone through the same exercise, same discussion,
Jerry,
to be honest with you.
address the technology for a second.
Patrick, do you want us to say a few words about the technology in
Just
the basis
the new
for our
specialists and the
request?
plan.
Patrick, why don't you come over
Yeah.
here? Come over here and sit with us. You're the assistant superintendent now. Patrick's our assistant superintendent, for those of you who don't know him.
Thank
Dr.
you.
David.
So yes, the technology that's called for in here, the cuts, we've really put a lot of time in over the last 5 years to sketch out moving to a model with more digital learning specialists, and our goal is to have one person in every school. We currently have one person who essentially travels among the elementary schools, and essentially one person now who's a .4, teaching .6 at the high school, in a brand-new building with all this new technology, really trying to get out and help teachers and students using technology, and you can't really do that with .4 of a position. So these positions are essential that we're trying to build this model moving forward. At this time, it is one of those things that is on there in that second tier of cuts. And we have a lot of decision-making if we do have to reach into those cuts. It's not an area we'd like to go into.
Thank you, Patrick. Marcy, anything else?
No, thank you for your time.
All right. We always feel if we can answer Marcy's questions, we can answer anybody's questions, so. And again, feel free to ask. Anybody? Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Hi, Melissa Archibald. So I noticed you did have special education on your list, and I noticed that it's one of the things that you're trying as a cost containment. But having a first grader as an elementary student, what are you trying to contain? What are you not adding? What did you plan on adding? And what are
That's a good question. I think what you're seeing up there are tuition costs. What we have now is a decrease in the number of out-of-district tuitions that we have to pay, and that's where the savings has come from. I'll turn it over to one of you guys to expand upon that, but I think we went from like 38 to 33 out-of-district placements, and that's where we saved the money.
That's exactly right. There's no programs that we're looking to reduce. It's more cost savings through students that we are either keeping in or are bringing back into the district.
And quite frankly, that's fairly volatile, depending on between now and any time during the next school year as to whether or not that could go up or down.
Yeah, I'm going to add that that's probably the riskiest area of the budget that we can show reduced costs, because history shows that, I can't remember the last year we had fewer outplacements at the end of the year than we had at the beginning of the year. So while it's there as a reduction, it's a risky reduction.
And that's part of the good work we're doing to keep students in
Right.
district as well.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Dave Doucette, do you have a capital budget plan?
I'll turn it over to Michael.
So yes, we do. And I believe we're in year 3 of what we did about 3 years ago, what the town and the school department have done is we have moved to a more consolidated town-wide approach to large capital projects. And we've developed a committee called the Capital Improvement Planning Committee, who meet regularly throughout each fiscal year. And they review requests from every town department, including the school department. So the school department does have our own long-term large capital plan. We present that annually in the fall to the school committee every year. And then the projects that the school committee wrote at that presentation and part of our 5-year capital plan move on to requests to be funded and vetted through this capital improvement planning committee. So the committee here throughout the course of the entire year really meet with several department heads and hear what the needs are, and then we've actually worked very, very hard, and there's members of the CIPC here. Mr. Kelleher actually chairs the committee, on the finance committee as well, and we've worked very hard and I think done an exceptional job at trying to come up with a funding strategy that would essentially assist the town over the next several years to fund a consistent, almost $1 million of large capital projects in terms of between borrowing and free cash, in terms of looking at all of our funding sources. So it's certainly worked very, very well. I believe the CIPC is due to make their presentation of the capital projects this year that kind of made the funding list to the Board of Selectmen at the end of the month, and then that list will move on for going to town meeting.
Michael, can you list the projects that we forwarded to CIPC this year?
Sure. So the school department forwarded 5 total projects. The first project was a replacement of a special education van. We have a fleet of special education vehicles that we certainly transport our students sort of in-house special education programs. There's a 2005 vehicle in need of replacement, so that was one of our high priorities. We have a plan to address the Hood School parking lot. There's certainly some deterioration going on in the Hood School parking lot, so we had a 2-year phase-in plan to start to repave the Hood School parking lot. Our third and fourth request focused on technology. The third request was to continue our computer replacement device plan throughout the district. Our plan for next year was a focus on the Hood and the little schools to address some computer labs at the Hood and the little schools, and to move forward with getting new devices and replacing much needed school computers. The fourth request was a request for an upgrade of our data management software. In terms of, we have several software that we handle various data in terms of our student data, our staff data that we need to report annually, reports that we have to report annually to the state. So we've looked at an approach to upgrade some of the software. That was the fourth request. And really the fifth request was a multi-function activity vehicle. We've looked at, and it really was an attempt to try to save money to our athletic transportation budget by purchasing a multi-function activity bus. We've seen other districts have success at doing that, and bringing some of the smaller teams, by bringing that in-house as opposed to contracting out, you can actually save some funds. So those are the 5 main requests.
And I just comment too, when Michael spoke about the van, I think the first item on the list, a number of years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the district went to try to provide in-house transportation for special education students, and by doing that, we saved a lot of money rather than outsource it. So that's one of the reasons that we found it more economical to actually provide the vans and the driver than to outsource the cost of special education transportation. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
The question, you mentioned you were in contact negotiations with the teachers. So the new positions are wonderful, and I don't think anyone probably would want to cut any of that. But are you including in the budget, like I don't know exactly what goes into contract negotiations, but are you including things that are being discussed, because that's not going to be finalized by the time the budget's approved, right? How does that all work? And is that then, if all of these positions get approved, does that go into what would be considered level set for next year? Or are those positions then considered on the chopping block again? Just to understand how that works.
Well, contract negotiations are ongoing. As to whether or not they'll be finalized before town meeting, we don't know. There's no way to tell right now. But again,
There is money in the budget to accommodate contract negotiations. As far as the positions, once the positions are in the budget, if they're in the budget next year, they'll be in the year after, provided the funds are available. I mean, so the year after, if we didn't have the funds, we wouldn't automatically chop those positions. If we didn't have the funds for all positions, we'd again just look at all the positions in the district and say what cuts.
it's our priorities. It's
It's
a question of priorities.
Yeah.
And again, there are funds in the budget, and the allocation of those funds is ultimately going to depend on where we end up with negotiations. Somebody else had their hand up. Yes, Bob?
I'm just wondering if you could give us a better sense of how you feel about this $205,000 gap. Are you really nervous? Have we got the healthcare estimate in?
Yeah, we have it. It's 4.9% increase this year, and that's been calculated into all of these figures.
So that's already calculated
It is.
into this gap?
It is.
205.
Yes, yes. So the $205,000, again, today's April 6th, we're going to vote on the budget April 27th, we're going to go to town meeting on June 1st. We have a $27 million budget. We're confident that between now and then, we can go through that budget and find the $205,000 and make cuts that hopefully aren't going to cause us a great deal of angst going through next fiscal year.
I mean, we've had some ideas. There's one of the, for example, and this doesn't get you the whole 200, but one of the areas that we've had to increase in the budget this year that Michael felt we should increase was on costs to cover unemployment compensation, because they ran a little high this year. But I recommended at a budget workshop that we chop 20,000 out of that, because I think the number we have in might be a little high, and if we get to the end of the year, we need to find 3,000 for unemployment insurance costs. I think we can find that. So we started doing that, going through, I haven't gotten through all the line items, but going through those line items where, they won't, I feel they won't damage the education system, as opposed to, maybe putting us in a little dicey condition at the end of the year for unemployment compensation. So trying to balance where we can cut. I wouldn't say I'm overly nervous. I'm not overly confident that it'll be easy to find the 205,000, but I'm pretty confident, even if we got to go in each line item and cut $100, whatever it is, we have to do that.
We certainly feel a lot better about it today than we did 3 or 4 weeks ago.
And then another question for Dr. Daly. Could you give us a better sense, because the restructuring of the media center, the paras, the computer lab, how many, I mostly worry because when I see that a technician is being eliminated, I'm like, oh goodness, what if something goes wrong? Can you tell us how many bodies do we end up with when you consider all the reduction of the paras, adding the digital learning specialist?
Sure. I can assure you that the plan, this is a multi-year plan that we've been discussing for many years. The idea is to add more full-time professional positions and to have those positions based out of one school. The model that we have now, and this is no reflection of the wonderful people in these positions, but they're fractured. You've got people splitting time, 0.6 at one school, 0.4 at another school, 0.4 in the library. The model that we've explored, if we were to do a full restructuring, which would necessitate all those digital learning specialist positions. So it's a little bit confusing, but if you did have full-time positions at the elementary school, plus a position at the middle school for library media, you would be replacing some paraprofessional positions with professional full-time certified teachers. So you'd be increasing the number of FTE in every building, so that you would have, the full model would include a digital learning specialist at every elementary school, plus a digital learning specialist, the two additional digital learning specialists that we have currently. You would also have a digital learning paraprofessional at each elementary school. And so those folks would be working somewhat in the library, somewhat in the computer classrooms, but currently our paraprofessionals are working with teachers to deliver curriculum. What we're talking about here is a situation where eventually we're going to have a professional who's a certified teacher who's able to deliver a technology curriculum. It's very different than something that's done with a paraprofessional at this time. Again, folks in those jobs are doing a great job, but it's a very different model from what we have now for what we'd be looking for moving forward. Similarly with the library media, as we're aware, the library and the media and the classroom, the computer classroom, are really becoming one thing. And if you look at we have a wonderful library media specialist at the high school who currently is as well versed in Chromebooks and iPads as she is in research and databases. That's the model that we're looking at moving forward. It's really, if you look at the library, there's not as many print books as we had back in the past. So these professionals would be providing that support in a lot of ways similar to what our digital learning specialists are working with teachers for the research, for the production, and also for the post-production work and publishing of work digitally. So it's really that model moving forward. So it's a little bit confusing when you see some of the restructuring in the budget. We've also talked a little bit about technicians. The technician job is more of a behind-the-scenes person who is doing repairs of equipment. And so one thing that we look to do with our digital learning specialists, we've already started this year, and we would continue this with our new positions, is adding more technician responsibilities to some of what they're doing. Because a lot of what's happening, if you look at an iPad, you're not taking that apart like you used to. A lot of the technical work is done through software, and so it's something that our digital learning professionals could absolutely handle. And it's evolving. There's not as much unscrewing and tinkering as there used to be. That said, there's still definitely a need, no matter what model we go with in the future, to have some people with the flexibility to get into classrooms. It takes a long time to outfit a lab or to run some tests or to do some troubleshooting. And so you do need that flexibility with some of these positions to be able to spend that time in a classroom or in a whole building testing out systems.
Thank you, Dr. Daly.
Do you feel that if you had this, with this new restructuring and one FTE, digital learning specialist in each elementary school, do you have, how would that play out if we went to online state testing, without mentioning the word? Do you have enough staff? I know that the bachelor school, you know, it was all hands on deck. Do you think that you would have enough staff to repeat the same thing next year without putting all hands on deck at one school?
Sure, so we would, I mean, first of all, we're still gathering the data on how successful it was. This year at the bachelor school, we did a full, we used one school where we looked at computerized testing. It's a major reason why we went with this model, so we could get a sense of what's coming in the future. No matter what assessment we go with, we do believe that it will eventually be on computers. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but within a few years, it will be going that way. It was an all hands on deck situation this year. That is difficult. If we had our current staffing this year, there's no way that I would recommend scaling up to computers at all 5 schools for next year. It would not be possible with our staff the way it is. But 2 things are going to happen. Number one, our staff is much more confident. We had all hands on deck, but I think by the end of it, by the end of the second week, I think we were all a lot more confident. Mr. Colleen was great. He's learning more. All of our teachers, their confidence levels in how to address some of the issues with the technology are increasing. So in many other school systems, a lot of the classroom teachers are handling some of the technology pieces. A big piece that Mr. Colleen and I talked about this year was we wanted our tech staff on there every day so that that burden wasn't on the teachers this year. But I think as we grow and we learn more and we get more comfortable with the system, that would not be an issue. But by increasing those digital learning specialists to each building to really, from day one, increase that capacity to understand online testing among many other things that those people would be aware of, that model would be much, much more helpful in the future to ready our buildings for digital learning, of which online testing is one small piece. My tech team said that the experience of being all together at that building for the last 2 weeks has been a real groundbreaking moment for us as a team, because we've learned so much about how to roll out and fix problems with those Chromebooks that we never would have learned if we weren't under that microscope in that testing situation. So that accountability piece kind of pushed us to all be on hands on deck, but the benefit is going to be we now understand completely how to roll out these devices. And our model is now, what's worked well with the Chromebooks at the bachelor school, as Michael mentioned through our large capital plan, is to now do that in our other elementary schools, in addition to all the new technologies being purchased for these buildings. So it's been a real benefit, and that's this model that we're looking at with our digital learning specialist, who would be overseen, by the way, by a digital learning coordinator, is our model moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yeah, Julie? And I'll get right to you.
Perfect. So with the proposed digital learning positions, we're retaining the computer lab paras at the elementary level?
No, it's a new model system. So if we were to have digital learning specialists at each school, you would have new positions called digital learning paraprofessionals. And that would combine some of our library paraprofessionals and some of our digital learning professionals. It might be many of the same people, I'll say. But we're thinking about positions. What you're taking are these fractured positions where people are at one school for a couple of days and another school for a few, and making one person at that building all the time as a paraprofessional, and also one person at that building full-time as a professional. So you have 2 people in the building working on library media at each building. Great.
Abby?
Abby Holman, Chairman of the Finance Committee. There's a sort of certain amount of up and down on this page and the presentation, which is great, early on. But could you tell me what is the net total of new FTEs?
Sure. So in the preliminary budget proposal, between all the NRPS 2016 initiatives, the enrollment-driven changes, and some of the needs we look at, paraprofessionals, et cetera, was a net increase of 11.4 FTE. Based on the reductions that are listed on the slide here, and some of the new positions that we've looked at, that we would balance the budget on, it would end up being, at the moment, a net increase of about 7.1 FTE.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Scott Buckley. I think a lot of, North Reading's great about supporting its kids, and we spend a lot of money to do that. Just a couple points I wanted to make sure that people are thinking of. Things like technology, I think the PTOs, the parents here, a lot of what gets donated is in the form of technology. I just want to make sure that people understand that when parents are coming out of pocket to donate smartboards, it could be seen as disrespectful that teachers aren't using the smartboards because they don't know how to use the smartboards. If you're cutting expenses because that's an easy thing to take off, a lot of times teachers and parents aren't going to let the kids go without. It's just going to be that the list each year is going to grow in terms of what you're supposed to bring in. I mean, we're already sending in disinfecting wipes and paper towels and other very simple expenses that get cut. Teachers will bring things into their classrooms, and I just think when we're cutting, I want to make sure that things that may seem like a luxury, there already are people that are picking up the gaps, PTOs, parents, other organizations, and a lot of times what they're donating is in the form of technology and expenses, and when we do an override, and the community says we want all these technologies in the school, if we can't take advantage of it, the next time we're going to ask for things, it's going to be harder to get it if the stories get out that teachers don't understand how to use the technologies that are in the classroom already. The only other point I wanted to make was, obviously any line item that you're thinking about cutting is going to be, very important to somebody. I just think we want to be able to offer our kids as many options as we can. Something like kindergarten, I think it's shameful that if you want to send your kid to kindergarten, you can't. So I think it's great that we're able to now say we're trying to at least offer that to everybody. If you have to pay for that, you have to pay for it. But I think it would be a shame if ultimately at the end, everybody doesn't get to make the decision if they want to send their kid to full-day kindergarten. So I do think that is something that should stay as well.
Well, I think that's something we're moving towards this year, is to accommodate everybody with full-day kindergarten. And as you suggested, unfortunately, it's expensive. I think it's probably $200 a year here in North Reading, which is one of the higher fees. And just to again confirm what Scott said, he's right. All the contributions that are coming from the councils and the parent organizations and the boosters, if you look on page 4 of your handout on the PowerPoint presentation, that's not even included in that number on the offsets. This is in addition to that. So, and again, every school committee meeting, we're acknowledging and accepting contributions from various organizations, and we appreciate it, and we do not discourage it. Unfortunately, it's become a way of life for us. So, and yes, ma'am, you wouldn't expect it. Did I overlook you more than once?
Right. I just had a quick comment that I wanted to agree with Mr. Webster and Mrs. Bailey about the high school teaching staff. I think it's critical to keep your plan of addressing those very large classes.
Agreed.
Good. I just want to address Scott's comment. I'm trying to get a handle on it. I've asked Michael to do this, and I don't know if we'll be able to, on exactly how much the parent-teacher organizations are donating to our schools and what that money is being used for. I think in the last 3 meetings, we've gotten over $50,000 in donations from, be it the parent-teacher organizations or we have a JV hockey program at the high school. The only way that exists is we have a hockey boosters club that pays for all the ice time, all the officials, and all the travel. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't have a JV hockey program. And the reason why I want to do that is because the state needs to be aware that, not only are we charging more than $1 million in fees and tuitions each year, but we're probably collecting anywhere between $100,000 and $300,000 from PTOs. And that doesn't count the money that teachers are spending on their own, which a story I just read a couple of weeks ago said it averages somewhere between $200 and $500 per teacher per school year, and also what the parents are spending. There's no way we're going to collect that money. No way we're going to know, how much Scott's paying for the, for the disinfectant wipes, or someone's paying for the paper towel. But all of it is wrong. All of it is, the PTO's raising money and giving it to the schools is great. But that should be for enrichment, for special things. It shouldn't be for, buying technology for the schools. That should be part of what society provides the school system. And our state doesn't fund us to allow us to do that. So I don't know if Michael's going to be able to come up with those numbers, but it's a challenge of kind of thrown out there, and hopefully we can figure that out at some point.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's one thing we have been tracking closely. Certainly in the last 2 fiscal years, we have a new kind of process where I think we're accounting for them more regularly, and we certainly have been keeping close track of that, so something we can actually review and present to the legislative committee in detail.
Yes, Michael?
Just wanted to maybe add a little bit to that. Michael and I were talking last week. He sent me a list of all the unfunded requirements we have. And I just want to mention to everybody, it added up, it netted out at $9.1 million. So that's one of the challenges that we face, and we've talked with Brad Jones and Senator Tarr about this, and it really needs to be addressed.
These are mandated type programs or things that we, federal and state, that we're required to do, but there's no additional funding to do them.
When I saw the chart, I
every year.
could not believe all the things that you mandated on you. And when you netted out $9.1 million, that's pretty heavy. The taxpayers have stepped up and they're doing the right thing, but we need to start pushing back on the state a little bit more. I don't know how we do it. I know it's easy for me to say it, but I know it's very difficult.
Just to give an example, and it's an easy one to understand, which is why I use it. There's the state sends us money every year. It's called Circuit Breaker Fund. It's to cover costs mainly for out-of-district tuitions for special ed students. So you look at that number, and the state says they're going to cover 70% of out-of-district special ed tuitions. But then you look into it, and they don't start covering 70% until we spend like what, Michael, 25 or 30,000?
It's closer to 40,000.
So the district pays the first $40,000.
And then they pay 70%.
And then they pay 70% of anything over 40,000.
And some of these out-of-district placements could be $100,000. I'm sorry.
Except that some years they don't fund it fully.
Well, right. So it's, some years it's been 50%.
So they don't do even what they've committed to do.
And clearly we understand, everybody understands the obligation to educate every child. But the state makes these, the state says you have to do this, you have to send out of place, out of district, we understand all that. And then they say, we're not going to support you financially. And, I know no one likes taxes, but I think Mr. Bowers has had a great idea. I think he came up with it a couple of years ago, is if they added 1% to the sales tax and dedicated the entire thing to education, we'd eliminate most of our problems. Of course, we know we'll go to education for the first year, then the next year we'd be supporting new casinos or something, so.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well, that's true.
I actually suggested that to the governor about 6 years ago. And instead of doing the 1% and dedicating it to education, he did 1.25% and spent it all over the place. So we didn't end up by doing very well. And in addition to that, the Chapter 70 funding as a percentage of state receipts has diminished every year for the last several years. So again, the state is not putting out what they should, and they keep adding on. We've got this mandate, one of the mandates is to do an evaluation of teachers, and the expanse of that is so great that it's just costing us a fortune, but they don't acknowledge the added cost. I was going to suggest to Mr. Prisco that maybe since he knows the governor, personally, he might show on his door and tell him about this in a very personal way.
And it's not only the state this year mandated that all teachers have to be fingerprinted. So you'd think, okay, the state's going to pay for that, right? Or the state's going to give the district the money to pay for that. Teachers have to pay $65 to get fingerprinted. And so you look at things like that, and that's why I'm glad there are a lot of people here to hear these things. And you see what not only we're up against, but what teachers and administrators are up against. It's not fair. And if you're going to mandate things, at least give us some of the money to support those things. All of it would be great, but some would be helpful.
Any other comments, questions? Again, this is the time and place for it. Yes, ma'am.
Kathy Vitro, 2 Brooks Road. I also teach at the Batch. The parent organizations do support immensely to our classroom teaching, and I do think smart boards are an enrichment to my teaching. And unfortunately, there's one per grade level in our building. But the funds are also used for our field trips and things like that, so they are being used appropriately in the parent organizations put a lot of time into fundraising. But I do think that where the state and federal governments are not backing up their mandates, that maybe the town needs to start doing something. And dual tax rates can be done. I used to negotiate leases with big landlords, and you can have dual tax rates and not hurt the small mom and pop shops.
Well, the dual tax rate is something for the Board of Selectmen to decide.
No, I know, but North Reading might have to
Quite
take
frankly,
charge of
this
it.
community doesn't lend itself to a dual tax rate. That's
Yeah,
my
yeah,
opinion.
explain.
You know, we've got 12, 13% commercial industrial base here. And if you try to do a tax classification, the burden on the businesses, small businesses, is going to be overwhelming, and it's going to result in very, very little savings to the homeowner, to be honest with you. So, but again, and I call Mr. Messeri, but I know this comes up every year, annually there's a vote, and I have to support the selectmen on this. I don't think it's going to do, raise. It's actually not going to raise any money. It's going to give relief to the residential taxpayer, but I think it's going to be minimal. There's going to be a big price to pay for the commercial properties.
First of all, splitting the tax rate will not raise more revenue,
No.
it'll just shift
Shift
the
the
tax
burden.
rate. But that being said, one of the board's main strategic plan is to increase our commercial base. And we're putting a lot of energy and focus this year on it. Mr. Briscoe will talk about a deal with cut with the state over the Berry property. And so we're working to increase that base, but it isn't going to happen overnight. And as the economy picks up, the opportunity to do that is increasing, where it was pretty stagnant for 5 or 6 years.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, no, I would just add on that real quick. You mentioned the 12.5%. You're right. That is our commercial base, and that has to be our strongest objective right now. We have to increase that up into the 15 to 20%. If you look around Wilmington, you see what they're able to do with their school, and I think the taxpayers are getting hit.
Well, in Wilmington, you have a 40% commercial industrial base, and there's a big difference in shifting that tax burden.
We're never going to get there, but we do have some opportunities, and we put together this new committee. We're focusing on, we have some beautiful real estate down Concord Street and 28. It's just underutilized right now, and we're going to try to motivate the commercial property owners to improve on those, which will create a bigger base for us. But the split tax rate, it doesn't generate any more money for us. If we take it and we move over here, it's still the same top line number.
Well, I don't see the residential ever going down, no, without it.
No, when the cost goes up.
Only if you move.
But I did have another question
Yes.
too. So you have negotiated and settled with all of the custodians, the secretaries, the paras, and administration.
Everybody's on a 3-year contract that began last year. The only contract that's still left open is the teacher's contract.
Okay.
Food
For the food services, but that's a very small.
And I
small
just
group.
would like to ask that you are as fair with the teachers as you were percentage-wise with all of the other groups. Because we work 60 hours a week during the school year. We are not off summers. We are not. If we leave before 5 o'clock at night, it's with work.
Our objective is
Okay,
always to
so
be
I
fair
do
in
ask
contract
that
negotiations.
you be as fair as you can.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Gill.
Yes, Jeff Yule, Selectman. Regarding unfunded liabilities, with the advent of Common Core and Park, how has the federal government been providing us funds to make sure that it's covered in a long term? Is there, we're going to get down that same road of unfunded projects and programs as a result of Common Core?
I direct this to the administration.
Sure. Any new testing, the cost doesn't come to the district with that particular piece. That cost is absorbed by the state. I believe the new test, the latest figures that I've seen, it's actually less expensive here. And again, moving to computers will be a cost savings at the state level. It's one of the reasons why I think that it will go that way eventually. As far as going to Common Core, there's not really any difference. I mean, the idea would be that, there are new materials that need to be purchased, but we have a cycle anyway for replacing books and materials, and so we're in those cycles anyway. So when you replace those materials would need to be aligned to new standards. And a lot of what's happened with Common Core, because it's a national movement, you actually have a lot of free resources like Engage New York that have created entire curriculums that's available for free. So in a lot of ways, there's a cost savings by having a national curriculum with everyone kind of working on it together. So those are different things that we're looking at now. But there's not been any additional funding necessarily to do this. There was Race to the Top funds that were given to the state nationally, hundreds of millions of dollars, in order to both build the park test and the engine that's a computerized-based engine, and also many, many dollars that were given to the state to build a lot of materials for Common Core. North Reading didn't participate in Race to the Top, and so we did not receive a lot of those funds, but we did receive some of the benefits of those funds, including model curriculum units that have been designed and many other pieces that came out of that national fund.
Thank you, Dr. Dell. Mr. Webster?
Yeah, that's why I had, one of the things, and this doesn't talk about Common Core and Park, but one of the areas where, and it's hard to quantify exact dollars, but it's the new teacher and administrator evaluation systems, which has added so much more paperwork, so much more reporting to the state, so much more data reporting, so much more time. So, some of the time that, you spoke about that teachers have to spend now is on these evaluation systems. And teachers have to be evaluated.
We don't have a choice.
I think we had a pretty good evaluation system in North Reading, and we had a highly functioning school district. And so why didn't they just look at our system and say, well, you know what, make a few tweaks here, make a few tweaks there. You guys are all set. You do evaluations every 2 years. You have teachers are on professional pathways. You know what you're doing here. But instead, they looked at every district and they looked at the low performing districts and they said, your teacher evaluation, administrative evaluation system is horrible. So we're going to change it not only for you but for everybody. So can I say there's a specific cost to that? No, but I'd say that if we could add 2 more administrators who are responsible for that kind of evaluation program, and we could add another data specialist that has to input all the data, which we should be doing. It's that kind of thing. So it's people being taken away from what they do.
We have some administrators that are doing evaluations for 30 or 40 people.
Right.
In the district, so. Yes, anybody else? No? Going once, twice? All right, at this time, I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. Bernard, anything else on the agenda?
No, I would just say there's nothing else on the agenda for this evening, but we will have the continued discussion on the budget at the April 13th meeting at the middle school.
This will be an ongoing discussion until, even after April 27th. But I'd like to thank everybody for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. It was a good turnout. At this time, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Cliff. Second by Mel. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None.